The room smelled of power and polished wood. Every pair of eyes in the executive boardroom watched as Nina Carter stood at the head of the long mahogany table. Her hands rested lightly on the surface, steady and calm, though she could feel the storm rising beneath her ribs. Across from her, Richard Hale, the CFO with a voice as smooth as glass, pushed a stack of papers forward. "Your services are no longer required, Miss Carter," he said, his tone sharp enough to cut through the air. Silence. Every member of the board sat motionless, except for the faintest smirk pulling at the corner of Richard's mouth. The vote tally glowed on the wall, unanimous. Every executive had voted her out. Nina's eyes swept across them one by one, 6 faces pale with self-satisfaction. Her photo frames on the shelf behind her wobbled as Claire Whitman, the COO, stood abruptly, knocking them down. The sound of shattering glass echoed like applause. "Let me help you pack," Claire said sweetly, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. Nina knelt to collect the fallen photographs, one of her parents, another from her first day at the company. The shards of glass caught the light, flashing like tiny knives. She gathered them carefully, her fingers steady, her dignity unbroken. As she rose, every executive towered above her, waiting to see her flinch. But she didn't. She met their eyes with calm precision. "What would you do," she asked quietly, "if your own team tried to erase you?" Richard frowned, uncertain whether she meant it as a question or a warning. The meeting ended. The board celebrated, certain they had secured victory. None of them noticed the small, controlled smile forming on Nina's lips as she walked away. They had just handed her exactly what she needed. 2 years earlier, the elevator doors of Horizon Technologies slid open with a soft chime. Nina stepped out wearing a navy suit that spoke of quiet authority. Every detail about her was deliberate, from the calm confidence in her walk to the slim leather portfolio in her hand. She had come from Silicon Valley with a Stanford degree, 2 successful startups behind her, and a reputation for saving dying companies. Horizon was her newest challenge, a once promising tech firm that had lost nearly 30% of its value in under 2 years. Richard Hale had been waiting for her in the lobby. His handshake was cool, short, and reluctant. "I'll show you around," he said, avoiding her gaze. "Appreciated," she replied evenly. "I'm looking forward to meeting the team." As they toured the executive floor, Nina noticed the subtle choreography of resistance. Introductions were curt, smiles forced. "This is Claire Whitman, our Chief Operating Officer. This is Alan Brooks, Chief Technology Officer. And this is Martin Fox, our Chief Marketing Officer." Each name came with a different shade of disinterest, polite words, cold eyes. Their posture shifted slightly as she approached, as though making space not out of respect but rejection. By the time the tour ended, Nina already understood the atmosphere. The air was polite but heavy with unspoken doubt. Later that afternoon, while washing her hands in the restroom, she overheard voices through the door crack. "How long before the diversity hire realizes she's in over her head?" Claire's voice. Richard's laugh followed. 6 months, tops." Nina dried her hands slowly, face expressionless. She'd heard worse before, but this time, it wouldn't end the same way. When she entered her office that evening, the space felt half-ready, as if the company itself didn't want her to settle in. Her computer access hadn't been activated, essential files were missing, and the assistant assigned to her reported technical issues every other hour. Nina didn't complain. She documented every obstacle, every delay, every subtle act of sabotage, written, time-stamped, noted. Calm, strategic, patient. As the sun dipped below the skyline, she left the building quietly. Her car, a deep gray electric sedan, glided through the city until she reached a quiet overlook above downtown. The skyscrapers shimmered below. Horizon's tower stood tallest, its name glowing proudly in blue. Nina pulled out a secure phone and dialed a contact listed only as K. "Phase 1 complete," she said softly. They took the bait. The voice on the other end was calm, measured. "Good. Do we proceed with Phase 2? Nina watched the city lights blink in silence. "Yes," she said finally. "They won't see what's coming." 3 months into her leadership, the board gathered for the quarterly meeting. The room was bright with glass walls and polished steel, every surface reflecting ambition. Nina stood at the podium, poised and confident. Our initiatives have reduced customer acquisition costs by 17%, she explained, pointing to the data. And retention rates are rising for the first time in 4 years. Richard leaned forward, interrupting. These numbers seem overly optimistic. Temporary market fluctuations could explain the change. Without breaking rhythm, Nina tapped her tablet. These metrics are benchmarked against the industry average. Our performance exceeds it by a clear margin, Claire interjected next. Early spikes often lead to later crashes. The data doesn't support that, Nina replied. If you turn to page 12, Ms. Carter, Alan cut in. Your strategies deviate from established practices. The pattern was obvious now, each voice joining in a rehearsed rhythm of resistance. Still, Nina didn't lose composure. She countered every argument with research and evidence, her voice steady against the tide. The chairman, George Winton, remained silent through it all, his expression unreadable. The meeting ended without approval, but also without defeat. Later that day, she found her parking spot reassigned to the farthest corner of the lot. Her assistant had been replaced. Her calendar filled with meetings she hadn't been invited to. Nina said nothing. She just smiled faintly, the kind of smile that unsettled anyone who didn't understand patience. That night, at a gala dinner with potential investors, Richard introduced her with that same condescending charm. And this is Nina Carter, our temporary CEO, he said, his voice oozing false warmth. When she tried to explain her expansion strategy, he interrupted repeatedly, until a man in the crowd caught her eye. Daniel Chen, a venture capitalist with sharp instincts. After the dinner, he approached quietly and handed her a card. Call me, he said. I recognize real leadership when I see it. That evening, behind the security of an encrypted office downtown, Nina met with her financial advisor. The room was soundproof, the air still. They're working against me, she said plainly. Perfect, the advisor replied, spreading documents across the table. That means they're predictable. The numbers glowed softly under the desk lamp. Shares, acquisitions, and company assets. Piece by piece, her private firm had been quietly buying Horizon stock under multiple shell companies. Every move they make strengthens your position, the advisor said. Nina looked at the figures again, eyes sharp. They're building their own trap, she murmured. And I'll be waiting when it closes. 6 months later, the boardroom felt colder. The smiles were thinner, the greetings shorter, and the tension sharper than glass. Every executive came armed with spreadsheets designed to bury Nina's credibility under data manipulation and deceit. Richard stood first, projecting confidence that wasn't entirely his own. Performance has declined across key sectors, he said, clicking to a slide full of red arrows. Customer satisfaction is down. Market share is shrinking. These failures occurred under Ms. Carter's leadership. Nina examined the screen, her calm unwavering. These figures don't match the verified reports, she said. If we compare George, the chairman, cut her off with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Perhaps you should take more time to understand the company's inner workings before challenging those with experience. The others watched her carefully, waiting for a reaction. She gave them none. Claire leaned forward, pearl necklace gleaming beneath the lights. I think Nina should step back from the Morrison account, she said. My team can manage it more effectively, Alan nodded. And product development should return to my direct oversight. Her methods have been unconventional. One by one, they dismantled her authority like wolves pulling at a carcass. Every sentence framed as professionalism. Every word laced with quiet venom. They didn't raise their voices, but the attack was total. Nina took notes, her expression unreadable. She would not give them what they wanted, the satisfaction of breaking her. But when she saw Martin subtly recording the meeting on his phone, she knew the game had shifted. That night, the elevator ride down felt longer than usual. Her reflection in the glass walls was still, the only thing unmoving in a world built to watch her fall. At home, she poured herself tea instead of wine. No distractions, no weakness. She called Kay again. They're accelerating, she said, and so will I. The next morning, Nina logged into a secure server, away from the company's network. The numbers on her private dashboard painted a different truth. Horizon's real performance was thriving. 15% growth, record client retention, and new contracts from 3 major partners. Her anonymous holding company had just acquired another 2% of Horizon's shares. Quietly, methodically, she was becoming the company's largest unseen shareholder. She sat back, her apartment filled with faint city light. On her desk, framed photos of her parents reminded her of the battles they fought, not in boardrooms but in courtrooms. Her father's voice echoed in memory. "They will underestimate you. That's your advantage." At the office, she noticed new humiliations layered with precision. Her office relocated to a maintenance wing. Her parking badge revoked. Her assistant replaced by someone loyal to Richard who smiled too easily when delivering bad news. Diane, the replacement, appeared at her door with a chirpy tone. "I'll be supporting you during this transition period," she said, emphasizing the word transition as if it were already decided. The next meeting was worse. The executives filled the table. Only Nina's seat was missing. Richard gestured casually. "Since you're stepping back soon, we thought you'd prefer to take notes." Soft laughter rippled across the room. Nina didn't flinch. She simply walked to the wall, took a spare chair, and placed it at the table's head. "I'm still CEO," she said quietly, "until the board says otherwise." The meeting continued, their attempts at humiliation bouncing off her like rain against glass. When Claire spilled coffee across Nina's printed reports, apologizing with exaggerated regret, Nina calmly handed her napkins. "Be careful," she said. "That stain looks permanent." After the meeting, her system access crashed again. Files gone. Projects reassigned. Her inbox filled with automated notices about leadership restructuring. The setup was complete. They wanted her cornered. That evening, she met Daniel Chen again, the investor from months before, in a private dining room overlooking the city. The table was set simply: water, contracts, and silence. Daniel leaned forward. "Our investors see great value in Horizon," he said. "But its current leadership structure is problematic." "My principals are ready to act," Nina replied, "but only under the right circumstances." He smiled faintly. "Those circumstances may arrive sooner than you think." They exchanged documents disguised as menus. Beneath the calm, a storm was forming. Nina's acquisition plan was nearly complete. Later that night, she recorded a private video message. "No theatrics, no tears, just truth. If you're watching this, something has happened," she began. "Every word I say is documented. Every file is backed up. They built their empire on deception. I built my plan on evidence. The file uploaded to a hidden server, programmed to release only if she was removed." 2 days later, her badge failed at the executive elevator. Security approached, apologetic but firm. "System maintenance, Ms. Carter, will escort you to gather your things." From behind cubicle walls, employees whispered. Some pitied her. Others watched, curious to witness the fall of power. She packed her essentials, left behind the framed family photos. She didn't need reminders of what she stood for. She carried it with her. Her phone buzzed, a message from George. "Meet me tomorrow. To my office, confidential." Simultaneously, a stock alert flashed across her screen. Another large block of Horizon shares had changed hands. That night, in a quiet office registered under one of her shell companies, Nina met Kay again, whose real name was Jade Wallace. Documents covered every inch of the table: emails, financial forensics, discrimination logs. "They've fabricated data," Jade said. "And we've traced every altered file to Richard's system." Nina nodded, scanning charts that glowed across multiple screens. "How close are we?" "We own 49%, Jade said, smiling for the first time. "By tomorrow morning, it'll be 51. "Perfect timing," Nina replied. "They think they're about to end my career. They're about to hand me the company." Morning sunlight poured through George's window. Richard, Claire, Alan, and Martin were already there when Nina arrived. Their smiles were tight and victorious. "Ms. Carter," George began, avoiding her eyes, "the executive committee has expressed serious concerns about your leadership. We're offering you a generous severance package. Resign quietly and we'll provide positive references." Nina opened the folder, scanned it, and looked up. "What specific performance issues justify this?" Richard projected new charts, all falsified. "The numbers speak for themselves." She said nothing. Beneath the table, her phone vibrated. "Transaction complete. 51% secured." She rose slowly, her voice calm. "Before I respond, has the full board voted?" "This is a courtesy meeting," George said. In that case, Nina said, gathering her things, I'll prepare my formal response for the board. Richard's eyes narrowed. Don't make this difficult. I never do, she replied and walked out, leaving silence in her wake. In the hallway, she called Jade. Activate Protocol 4. Have everyone in position by 2 o'clock. Then she called Daniel. It's happening today. Good, he said. We're ready. As she hung up, Nina's reflection in the mirrored wall smiled faintly, not with arrogance but with inevitability. The hour of reckoning had finally come. The clock ticked toward 2. The boardroom filled again, but this time power was shifting hands. By 2 o'clock, the atmosphere inside the boardroom was heavy enough to touch. Conversations fell to whispers when Nina entered. Everyone had gathered expecting a spectacle, a final humiliation. Instead, she walked in composed, wearing calm-like armor. 2 people followed her, a woman in a dark suit carrying legal binders, and a man with the quiet confidence of old money. They placed their briefcases neatly beside her chair and took their seats without a word. George, clearly uneasy, cleared his throat. We're here to discuss the executive committee's recommendation regarding leadership. He avoided her gaze. Richard stood, rehearsed and confident, clicking through slides that framed Nina's tenure as a series of failures. Horizon needs leadership that understands its culture, he said, using the same coded language he'd always used. Our goal is stability, not disruption. When he finished, the room went still. George turned to Nina. Do you wish to respond before we vote? Nina stood, her movement measured and deliberate. Yes, she said. But before I begin, allow me to introduce my colleagues. She gestured to the woman beside her. This is Jade Wallace, securities attorney and legal counsel for Carter Holdings. Then she indicated the man next to her. And this is Daniel Chen, managing director of Northbridge Capital. Confused murmurs rippled through the room. The executives exchanged glances, unsure what game she was playing. Before anyone could interrupt, Nina continued, before this board proceeds, there's something you all need to understand. Jade opened a folder and began distributing documents to each board member, neat, precise, silent. The faint rustle of paper filled the room. These, Nina said, are official filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission. As of 9:30 this morning, Carter Holdings owns 51% of Horizon Technologies' outstanding shares. The air shifted instantly. Richard froze mid-breath. Claire's smirk evaporated. Alan blinked like someone had pulled the ground out from beneath him. Nina let the silence stretch, every second twisting tighter. That means I am now the majority shareholder of this company, she said, voice steady as a blade. And by extension, your employer. George's face drained of color. That's impossible, he stammered. It's completely legal, Jade interrupted, her tone cool and factual. Every share was purchased on the open market, in full compliance with SEC regulations. Richard's voice rose. You planned this. You've been manipulating. No, Nina said sharply, cutting him off. I learned from you. I simply applied your methods more effectively. She tapped her tablet. The presentation screen behind her lit up, displaying the company's real financial data, the numbers they had buried. Under my leadership, Horizon grew 15%. Customer satisfaction reached a 5-year high. These are the actual results. Next, she showed the falsified data Richard had circulated. And this, she said, is what you've been feeding the board. Forged metrics, fabricated losses, coordinated sabotage. Jade placed a second stack of papers on the table. Internal emails, recordings, performance reviews. We have proof of systemic discrimination and deliberate obstruction, she said. Every conversation, every altered file, every whisper meant to undermine Ms. Carter. Nina's tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. Her composure was power enough. As majority shareholder, I am calling for an immediate vote to restructure the board. She turned to Daniel. Northbridge Capital holds an additional 12% and will vote with me. George looked around helplessly. This is madness. You can't. I can, she said, and I have. Richard shoved his chair back, the legs screeching against the floor. You can't do this. I built this company. Nina faced him fully. You built a house on someone else's foundation. You built it with stolen blueprints. Her eyes burned steady into his. 5 years ago, Horizon stole intellectual property from my mentor, Dr. Aaron Wright. You buried him in lawsuits until his company died. His idea became your flagship product. Gasps whispered around the room. Nina pressed a button and a photo appeared, her with Dr. Wright years earlier. I didn't come here to lead Horizon, she said softly. I came here to take it back. Security entered quietly. Richard and the others turned, expecting them to approach Nina. Instead, they stopped behind Richard, Claire, Alan, and Martin. You can't be serious, Claire said, voice trembling. Effective immediately, Nina said. You are terminated for cause. Your access is revoked and your devices have been locked. You will be escorted to collect your belongings. Richard's anger cracked through his composure. You planned this from the beginning. Nina's answer was simple. Of course I did. Security moved efficiently. The sound of their footsteps echoed as they led the disgraced executives out. None of them spoke. The only noise was the soft closing of the boardroom door. When silence settled again, Nina turned to the remaining members. Those who didn't participate in the discrimination may remain, while an internal review determines accountability. Horizon is changing. Whether you stay depends on your willingness to change with it. No one dared to argue. The next morning, news headlines exploded. Fired CEO secretly owns company that ousted her. Stealth acquisition turns corporate scandal into revolution. Financial networks ran the footage of Nina walking out of the boardroom while the former executives were escorted away. For the first time in years, Horizon's stock surged. Investors didn't just see a company reborn, they saw justice delivered through strategy. That afternoon, Nina stood before a full auditorium of Horizon employees. The entire company had gathered, hundreds watching in person and thousands more online. You've all heard rumors, she began. Here's the truth. The room was silent. Her voice filled it without force. I didn't come here to play politics. I came because this company forgot what it stood for. I was judged not by my results, but by my reflection. But the story doesn't end there. It begins here. Faces softened. Some watched in awe, others fought back emotion. This isn't about revenge, she said. It's about restoration. About building the company Horizon was meant to be. Innovative, fair, fearless. Applause rose slowly, then grew. People who had stayed silent before now stood, clapping louder, longer. Nina waited until it faded, then spoke again. We'll audit every department. We'll rebuild every structure. Those who stood against change will leave. Those who stayed silent will learn. Those who believed in better, you'll help lead the way. That night, alone in her office again, she looked out at the city lights. The same skyline that had once watched her fall now shimmered with possibility. The storm was over. The rebuilding had begun. But beneath the quiet, she knew the story wasn't finished. The people she'd exposed still had resources. They wouldn't go down without a fight. She smiled faintly, watching the lights of Horizon Tower reflected in the glass. Let them try, she whispered. I'm not done yet. Outside, thunder rolled over the city, distant but certain. The next battle was already forming, and Nina was ready for it. Weeks turned into months, but the fire never faded. Horizon's transformation had begun in public glory, yet behind the scenes the war only shifted battlefields. The executives Nina had removed weren't silent, they were scheming. Their lawyers flooded the courts with accusations, wrongful termination, hostile takeover, manipulation. Headlines turned sensational. But Nina never answered through interviews or statements. Her silence became strategy. Her response came where it mattered most, in results. Within 1 quarter, Horizon's revenue climbed 10%, client retention spiked, and the innovation team released a new AI platform that broke market records. Employees who had once walked on eggshells now carried themselves with purpose. Still, the shadow of the past hovered. One morning, Jade entered Nina's office holding a stack of legal papers. They've escalated, she said. Victor and the others, Richard and his team, filed for injunctions to freeze assets. Nina didn't flinch. Let them, she replied. Truth is the only thing that doesn't bend under pressure. She turned back to the window overlooking the city, her reflection strong and still. What's our countermeasure? Jade smiled faintly. Evidence, all of it. Their own words, their fake data, their recorded bias. Once it's in front of a judge, their credibility evaporates. Across town, Richard Hale sat in a high-rise office that no longer belonged to him, surrounded by his shrinking legal team. His confidence had begun to crumble. The lawsuits that were meant to destroy Nina had backfired, exposing the very discrimination he'd tried to hide. Within months, the case went federal. Courtrooms filled with reporters, employees, and industry observers. The air was thick with anticipation. When Nina took the witness stand, she was exactly as she'd been in every boardroom: steady, factual, fearless. She told the story not as a victim, but as a strategist. Every word was measured, every statement backed by proof. On March 17th, she said, performance data was altered before presentation. The original reports showed 15% growth. The revised version showed 3% decline. Her words carried no bitterness, only precision. It was the calm of someone who knew that truth was a sharper weapon than outrage. Richard's lawyers tried to twist her words. They failed. Every cross-examination unraveled under the weight of data, timestamps, and recorded conversations. Then came the turn. Heather Mills, the COO who'd once laughed behind restroom doors, stood on the witness stand, her voice shaking. She'd taken a plea deal to save herself. "He said she doesn't look like someone who should run this company," she testified, pointing to Richard. "He said the board would thank him once she was gone." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Richard's face went pale. When the prosecutor played the recordings, his voice, his words, the defense cracked completely. The tape played over the speakers. "She's just a face for the diversity quota. We'll correct that soon enough." The truth hit like a thunderclap. Jade sat beside Nina, her expression unreadable. She leaned slightly toward her. "That's the nail," she whispered. Nina didn't smile. She just exhaled. "No," she said softly. "That's the first spark." Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Journalists shouted her name, demanding comments. Nina didn't stop for any of them. She only said one sentence before getting into her car. "Justice doesn't need noise, it needs persistence." Inside Horizon, morale exploded. Employees began sharing their own stories of resilience. Anonymous messages of thanks flooded her inbox. Former staff who'd left under hostile leadership reached out, asking to return. Horizon felt alive again. The new energy was contagious. The toxic silence that had once haunted the hallways was gone. People spoke up. Ideas flowed. Diversity became strength, not decoration. One evening, Jade entered with a quiet smile. "The ruling's in," she said. Nina looked up from her desk. "And?" "The court found them guilty of discrimination, securities fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. They're banned from serving in any corporate boardroom for life. Financial penalties are severe. Criminal referrals are already filed." Nina closed her laptop slowly, absorbing the words. "Then it's over," she said. "Not yet," Jade replied. "It's only over when we rebuild what they broke." Nina nodded. "Then we keep going." A week later, she addressed her new leadership team in the boardroom that once symbolized exclusion. This time, the table reflected different faces, diverse, driven, and capable. The air hummed with possibility. "Our goal isn't to punish," she said. "It's to progress. The best victory isn't someone else's defeat. It's the system's evolution." Her words didn't just inspire. They instructed. Horizon launched internal mentorship programs, equity audits, and transparent hiring systems. For every rule that once locked people out, a new one was written to let them in. Investors watched, skeptics waited, but results silenced doubt. Within 6 months, Horizon's valuation doubled. Media outlets that once speculated on her downfall now called her leadership a blueprint for corporate redemption. Still, Nina refused to celebrate too soon. "Reform isn't a headline," she told her team. "It's a habit." Behind every success, she saw the ghosts of the people who never got a second chance, the ones who'd been silenced, dismissed, or erased. She vowed never to let their stories fade, and when she stood in that boardroom window again, city lights glittering like constellations, she whispered the same promise she'd made years ago. "I won't just win. I'll rewrite the rules." Far below, the streets of the city pulsed with life, unaware that history was shifting quietly in that glass tower, shaped not by those who'd held power, but by the one woman who had learned to take it back. A year passed, and Horizon no longer looked like the company Nina had inherited. The sterile halls had color now, art from young designers, laughter echoing between departments that once whispered in fear. The board meetings had changed too. The tension was gone, replaced by focus and curiosity. People came to solve problems, not to defend their egos, but progress came with new weight. Success drew attention and attention drew imitation. Other corporations studied Horizon's transformation like a living experiment. Universities requested case studies. Lawmakers reached out for policy insights. Everywhere Nina turned, her work rippled outward. Still, not all ripples were calm. Richard and his allies refused to fade quietly. Their legal appeals dragged through the courts, and though each one failed, the noise of their bitterness lingered. They appeared on late-night interviews, twisting the story, portraying themselves as victims of a vindictive takeover. When one of those clips played in a cafe television one afternoon, a young employee at Horizon turned toward Nina. "Doesn't it bother you?" she asked. "Hearing them still talk like that?" Nina smiled gently. "The truth doesn't need to shout over lies," she said. "It only needs time." Back in her office, Jade entered with a new report. "Media narratives shifting again," she said. "They're calling you the architect of accountability." Nina raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like a headline, not a legacy." "Maybe," Jade said, sitting across from her. "But it's still progress." The data on her tablet glowed with promise. Employee satisfaction had reached record highs. The mentorship program had tripled in size. For the first time in the company's history, leadership represented the world outside its glass walls. During a meeting that week, Nina asked her team a question that left them quiet for a moment. "What's our next risk?" "Risk?" one executive repeated. "We're thriving. That's the problem," she said. "Thriving breeds comfort. Comfort breeds stagnation. If we stop challenging ourselves, we'll become what we replaced." Her words carried through the room like electricity. And that afternoon, they began planning Horizon's next leap, a 5-year innovation roadmap to build technology that expanded access to education in underserved communities. Nina insisted that their products mean something beyond profit. Technology should level the field, she said, not raise new walls. Months later, she stood before the federal legislature testifying about corporate ethics and transparency. The same precision she once used to dismantle Richard's lies now built the foundation for reform. What happened at Horizon, she told the committee, wasn't unique. It was just visible. Most victims of workplace discrimination can't buy back their company. They shouldn't have to. Her words echoed through the chamber. They became the seed for what lawmakers later called the Corporate Accountability Act. For the first time, boardroom discrimination and data manipulation would face criminal oversight rather than civil penalties. After the hearing, a young congresswoman stopped Nina in the corridor. "You've changed how we talk about power," she said quietly. Nina nodded once. "That's the point. Power isn't meant to be guarded, it's meant to be earned every day." Back at Horizon, the team celebrated quietly. There were no parties, just purpose. Daniel joined as chairman of the board, and Jade, now chief legal officer, established an ethics council to monitor governance across all departments. Within a year, Horizon's valuation tripled. But Nina's focus wasn't the stock ticker. It was the people. Former employees who'd left under Richard's regime returned, their confidence restored. New leaders emerged from teams once overlooked. Even Bradley, one of the former executives who'd testified against Richard, reached out. "I failed to see what was broken," he said in his letter. "Now I want to help fix it." Nina accepted his offer, not as an ally, but as a lesson. "Redemption belongs to those who understand why they need it," she told him during their first meeting. "Not just those who ask for it." 6 months later, Horizon unveiled the Carter Foundation, a nonprofit wing dedicated to funding minority-led startups and scholarships for underrepresented students in technology and business. Nina stood before a crowd of journalists and entrepreneurs, her voice steady but warm. "This isn't charity," she said. "It's investment. We're investing in the ideas the world keeps overlooking." Applause filled the hall, but her eyes drifted toward the back of the room, where a framed portrait of Dr. Aaron Wright hung on the wall. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Innovation belongs to those who create, not those who steal." That night, alone in her office, Nina looked around at the world she'd rebuilt, an empire built not on control but on correction. The view from her window stretched far beyond Horizon's glass tower, into the city she'd helped transform. Jade entered, holding a report and 2 cups of coffee. "Another record quarter," she said. "And the incubator just graduated its first class. 20 new CEOs ready to build their own futures." Nina took the cup with a quiet nod. "That's how we win," she said. Not by holding power, but by giving it away. They stood together in silence, watching the lights flicker below. The city felt different now, freer, more awake. "Do you ever think about what it cost?" Jade asked softly. Nina's gaze stayed fixed on the skyline. "Every change costs something," she said. "But the cost of silence is always higher." The hum of the city filled the quiet room. Outside, the night pulsed with new beginnings. Businesses opening, students studying late, dreams taking root where barriers once stood. And for the first time in her career, Nina felt not the pressure to fight, but the peace of having turned the fight into purpose. The past was over. The work was only beginning. 2 years after the takeover, the city looked different. The tower that once symbolized exclusion now gleamed like a monument to transformation. The Horizon logo had been redesigned, no longer sharp and corporate, but fluid, alive, intertwined like the people who now defined it. Nina arrived early that morning, as she always did. Her office was minimalist but warm. Sunlight poured across framed photos of her parents and Dr. Aaron Wright, whose legacy had guided her through the storm. On one wall hung a circuit board from her first startup, a reminder of where everything began. Jade entered with her usual energy, a thick folder in hand and a grin that could break glass. "You might want to sit down," she said. The numbers came in. Nina didn't need to. She already knew what the report would say, but hearing Jade's words still felt like a quiet triumph. Revenue up 18%. Market share at an all-time high. And the new mentorship initiative? Oversubscribed by 400%. "People believe in this place again," Jade said softly. "They believe in themselves," Nina replied. "That's the real victory." Moments later, George knocked and stepped in. He was no longer the hesitant chairman who once avoided her gaze. Now he was Horizon's ethics officer, a position he'd requested himself after publicly acknowledging his past complacency. "The summit's ready whenever you are," he said. Nina nodded, closing her laptop. "Then let's make it worth the time." The conference room buzzed with anticipation. Executives from across the industry filled every seat, some alumni of Horizon's leadership incubator, others visiting skeptics eager to learn. As Nina entered, the room fell silent. She didn't start with a speech. She simply looked around the table and said, "2 years ago, this company almost destroyed itself because too many people mistook comfort for culture. We've rebuilt not by erasing the past, but by refusing to repeat it." Every word hit like truth carved in stone. She paced slowly, her tone conversational but unwavering. "The greatest competitive advantage in business isn't capital or innovation. It's people. Real people. The ones who solve problems quietly, who get overlooked because they don't fit the mold someone else designed." She paused, letting the room breathe with her. "If you want to change an industry, start by changing who gets to lead it." The applause was subdued but powerful, the kind that didn't need volume to carry weight. Afterward, as people lingered to shake her hand, Nina noticed one student in the back, young, nervous, holding a notebook too tightly. She approached with an encouraging smile. "What are you working on?" The girl blinked, startled. "Miss Carter, I'm developing a platform for sustainable microlending. It's part of your incubator program." "Tell me about it," Nina said, pulling up a chair beside her. The girl hesitated, then launched into an explanation. Passionate, hopeful, brilliant in its simplicity. Nina listened without interruption, just as someone once had for her. When the conversation ended, she said, "You're onto something important. Don't wait for permission to build it. Just build it right." The girl smiled, her nerves replaced by determination. "Thank you, Miss Carter." Nina watched her leave, and for a moment she saw her younger self walking into a boardroom full of doubt and winning it through patience, precision, and unshakable faith. That evening, the city skyline glowed beneath a violet sky. Nina stood by her office window, the reflection of the tower lights dancing in her eyes. She thought of her parents, her mentor, the long battles that had forged her resolve. The world outside had shifted because she refused to surrender to what was. Jade entered quietly. "Tomorrow's your Lifetime Achievement Award. You should probably write something down." Nina laughed softly. Everything worth saying has already been lived. The next night, she stood on a grand stage before hundreds of industry leaders, innovators, and journalists. The applause that greeted her wasn't just for success. It was for change, for endurance, for proof that power could be reclaimed without losing humanity. When the room finally settled, she began. True power isn't about control, she said, her voice steady and warm. It's about creation. It's the courage to build systems that let others rise even when you could stand alone at the top. She looked across the audience, faces illuminated, expectant. For years, people told me I didn't belong at the table. They were right. I didn't. Because the table itself was too small. So I built a new one. The crowd erupted into applause, but Nina simply smiled, her eyes calm, her hands steady. When it faded, she added one last line that carried across every corner of the room. The goal was never revenge. It was justice. And justice isn't loud. It's lasting. The standing ovation rose like a wave. But Nina's mind drifted elsewhere, to that student she'd spoken to the startups now blooming because of the foundation she built, to the people who once stood against her now teaching others how to change. Later that night, back in her office, she reviewed the latest applications for the mentorship program. Among them was one name she didn't expect, the daughter of an old adversary. The essay was honest, humble, hopeful. Nina smiled, took a pen, and signed her approval. She added a single handwritten note. Our future isn't limited by who failed before us. It's defined by who chooses to learn. Outside, the city hummed with life. Horizon Tower shimmered under the moonlight like a symbol reborn from its own ashes. The skyline wasn't just brighter, it was fairer. Nina leaned against the window, her reflection merging with the lights beyond. This, she whispered, was never about me. It was about what comes next. Somewhere across the city, that young student sat at her desk, sketching plans for her own company. Another story was beginning, one sparked by the same fire that had once refused to go out. The cycle continued, one voice rising, then another, not to replace but to expand, not to win alone, but to ensure no one else would have to fight the same battle in silence. And as dawn broke over the skyline, painting the tower gold, Nina Carter closed her laptop, ready for another day. The storm that once tried to destroy her had become the wind behind 1,000 new beginnings.